Hello, it is beginning of July and the tomatoes are starting to grow, and I'm going to be talking today about how to prune and trellis tomatoes properly. So what I have here is a bunch of indeterminate tomatoes, which means they're going to continue to grow upwards. These are not little bush tomatoes. These are going to grow 8 feet tall, and I have them in a very high density layout here. I already have the trellising line set up, and what I want to do today is just make sure that all the tomatoes are securely on their first line and that all of the suckers are cut off. So when you have a tomato plant, you want basically 1 or 2 very strong leaders. And to figure that one out, you're just going to take a look at the base of the plant and run up and figure out if it's a leader or another plant. This one is a sucker. I'm going to get rid of this sucker right here so that this plant has the best chance to grow tall, because all of the energy will be in the one main stem. I want really tall tomatoes here, and I want really good fruits, and that's what I'm going to be pruning. Today I'll be using my max tapener and my cheeky masses. These are 2 Japanese tools. You don't need to use them, but I do really like them. First thing you're going to do is cut off suckers, and do this for every single plant. And you know what's amazing about the tomato plant is that every single little hair that you see on the side of the stem is actually going to be growing into a root. So what I can actually do here is plant this in the ground, and it's going to grow roots. Now it might not survive because it's a super hot day, but I'm going to try it anyway, and I'm just going to cut back to there. I'm going to cut this part, and I'm going to plant this right in the ground, and we will see in a couple of weeks how it does. Now I'll know by like a couple of days if it works or not. It should work under the right conditions. This is just a fun experiment. All right, so now for pruning. This is a max tapener. You don't need to use this for your garden pruning. I just have it because I've done thousands of tomatoes before, and I find it to be a very good tool for trellising. If you're at home, you can just use twine to help trellis your tomatoes. I do prefer this, but it is an expensive tool. So what you're going to do for pruning your tomatoes is go underneath where your line is and like the first branch, and you're going to give it a lot of room actually. So you're going to kind of give a long, good amount of space, because this stem is still going to get very thick and you don't want to choke it out later on. So I've just kind of put it around the line and the plant, and then it'll grow into the trellis. So one thing about how we've planted these tomatoes is that they're very kind of close. They're high density, if you've noticed that. And in order to keep the plants healthy, you need to make sure that there's proper airflow between the plants, which requires a lot of pruning. But by doing that, then we ensure that we have larger tomato plants and more yield overall. So you can already see I have a tomato right here, and it's starting to ripen. Some of these varieties here have given us 1.5 pound tomatoes on their own. So I want to make sure that they're trellised properly. They've got really good airflow. So right here, there's a sucker on the plant. And a sucker is really just an extra branch that's trying to grow. I mean, tomatoes are very vigorous plants, so they're going to be growing branches everywhere, but we really only want one big stem, because that's where all the flowers and the tomatoes are going to come off of. So right here is this, and I'm just going to cut it right there, and that's it. You don't have to be afraid of cutting off suckers on your tomato plants. It's recommended actually, because then your tomato can put more energy into the fruits and less energy into producing these little branches that aren't really going to do very much. It's late June, early July, and these tomatoes are already at my hip height, which means that they've got a lot more growth to do. These will probably grow, they'll grow way over the top of this trellis line actually. It's important to keep them supported so that when they get heavy with the tomatoes, they don't fall over. And keeping them on a trellis line ends up yielding a bit more tomatoes. And so as the season goes on, every time that it reaches a new line is when I'm going to be trellising it. And if you have a trellis line like this, or you're going to be setting one up, you just have to be careful about taping it too tight. because the stem is still going to be growing. So you want it to grow into its trellis, and then you're gonna have tall, healthy tomato plants that are gonna make a lot of tomatoes for you. This works in a small garden, this works in a large garden. I really like trellising tomatoes. It's like my favorite way of growing them. We've used many different ways, just letting them lay on the ground or using a tomato cage, but this by far creates the most yield and the healthiest plants. So if you're going to be growing tomatoes this year, I do highly recommend putting them on a trellis line and keeping them well pruned. Subscribe to find out some more tips about your garden and to follow along with how these tomatoes end up growing, as well as the entire garden. Thank you for watching.